Hey guys, slightly out of character real-world motorsport video time. Well, the video clips are from F1 2019, but that's mainly so I can avoid being nuked from orbit by Liberty Media's legal team. But I digress. I've been getting a lot of requests recently to talk about how I feel about modern F1, so in a typically me fashion, I thought I'd take a look at some of the common solutions that us F1 fans come up with and pick them apart mercilessly. For me, the problems that F1 faces are complex, so right off the bat, any solutions that start with the phrase, "it's simple, just," should be treated with the same skepticism as an email from your gran. The problems in F1 are often simple to describe, but due to the varied interests of the various stakeholders, as well as the commercial aspects, the solutions are extremely complicated. And honestly, most solutions that you see proposed don't address one or many, or in a worrying number of cases, any of these factors. So, this is going to be a light-hearted look at some of the more common complaints I see about modern F1, compiled from various forum threads, and that calm, level-headed debate medium that is Twitter. First up, none of this should be taken at all seriously. It's all just opinion. But if you do want to know what my real view is and what I think could be done to solve the problems, then stick about until the end of the video. Oh, and before we move on, here's my 20-second review of F1 2019. If you liked F1 2018, then you'll like this. Everything Codemasters got right in the past has been incrementally improved, and the new content is very nice. But if you didn't like F1 2018, you won't like the new edition. None of the long-term issues that people have with the title have really been addressed. Next. So, before I get into the specifics, let's address the core problems. First up, modern Grand Prix are about as action-packed as my mid-teens, which is to say, you're better off entertaining yourself most of the time. The racing is really dull, the circuits are uninspiring, one team is dominating, and there seems to be little hope of the competitive order changing anytime soon. Essentially, the products become stable, so what are F1 fans suggesting to shake things up then? This is an argument that, like my resume, only looks good if you don't start questioning the details. In theory, you open up the regulations, encourage innovation, and get F1 back to its rightful place at the bleeding edge of automotive technology. But it all falls down in practice due to cost. The teams with the biggest budgets can commit more resources to working on multiple ideas, thereby creating more scope for a performance advantage. It has been said that 1,000 monkeys at 1,000 computational fluid design workstations will eventually reproduce the complete works of Adrian Newey, and there is something to that. Give the engineers at the big teams a blank sheet of paper and a Scrooge McDuck vault filled with Bernie bucks, and you're going to end up with huge performance differentials between the haves and the have-nots. 1992 would look like a nail-biter compared to this Black Mirror dystopian ideal for F1 2021. So, in my opinion, the more the regulations are opened up, the higher the likelihood of dominance from one well-funded team, Mercedes. The final counterpoint to the open up the regulations argument is, well, every spec racing series in the world pretty much. Spec series invariably produce close racing because, intuitively, all of the cars are the same, which forces teams to find advantages in very small and limited ways. Opening up the regulations would lead to the cars being more dissimilar, and that seems pretty counterproductive to me. Still, it'll look cool for the 6 races before everyone except for Ferrari and Mercedes goes bankrupt. Look, I don't like tarmac runoff either, even if you do paint it with nice, slimming stripes. But there are good reasons that circuits have evolved this way. Yes, we all know that tarmac slows the cars quickly without the risk of a wheel digging in and bringing on the end times, but there's also another important factor to consider. Tarmac runoffs drastically reduce safety cars because, well, fewer cars get stuck. I think we can all agree that recovery vehicles on track is a bad idea, and no one wants to see another preventable fatality. But the real question is, aside from squabbles about track limits, would adding a bit of aggregate really improve the show? The cars can barely pass each other as it is, often needing to use the runoff if a rare overtaking attempt goes awry. So I can't see things being improved when, for example, Daniel Ricciardo gets stuck in the kitty litter after another impressive dive bomb that doesn't quite work out. Then of course being followed by 5 laps of the Bernd Mailander show. I've got no time for this, sorry. The chance of someone dying didn't add anything to the spectacle for me, and if it did for you, seek professional help.
Brilliant. Nice move.
This is the one that really confuses me because, well, I'm not really sure what it's supposed to accomplish. The on-track action in the post-1994 refueling era was, much like my win record in iRacing, pretty sparse. I recall everyone having the same complaints about it being too hard to overtake as early as the mid-90s, thanks to a combination of cars and tracks. Sound familiar? And at the time, the consensus was that refueling just made things worse, with teams electing to make their passes in the pits rather than on track. You know how boring it is when commentators drone on about the tyres constantly? Well, in the mid-90s, all the talk was about fuel loads, so they could speculate about when drivers would have to pit. Let me tell you, 78 laps of Monaco was just as thrilling then as it is now. I guess the main argument for refueling is that you get to see the cars going at it at 100% all of the time with no fuel saving. And on paper, that sounds great. But the reality is that the vast majority of viewers can't tell the difference between how a car on heavy fuel looks and on fumes. And it's nigh on impossible to tell at the trackside. I know it's easy to look back at the late 90s and the early 2000s with rose-tinted glasses. The battle between Michael and Mika was immense, but they very rarely fought out on track. At the time, people were complaining just as loudly as they are today, though it was mostly through snarky letters to the editor in specialist magazines rather than suspiciously long Twitter threads or YouTube. Just remember, not every race was Hungaroring 1998. Let's sweep aside the whole argument about manufacturers' influence on the sport because we live in the real world and that's not a problem we're going to solve anytime soon. So, what are we trying to achieve by changing the engine format? Shaking up the order, better sound, better racing? Or is it just that more cylinders are intrinsically more exciting? Actually, that argument does have legs. But back to the other stuff. First up, Mercedes have, by and large, produced the best or near best engine pretty much every year since the late 90s, and across several different engine formula. So changing the formula probably won't stop the Stuttgart juggernaut. But I hear you say it would improve the sound. Yeah, sure it would. But, and I can't believe I'm saying this, really, is the sound even one of the top 10 issues with Formula One right now? Would forcing manufacturers to invest billions on new engines really be a net positive once you take into account all of the externalities? And crucially, would it actually improve the racing? Personally, I'd like to do away with race penalties entirely, but I get that that's not practical. So, if we're going to have penalties, then we need to have stewards that consistently apply the letter of the law, equally and in all cases. The problem is, F1 fans hate it when that happens. As per the wording of the rules, the Canada penalty for Vettel was a slam dunk on 2 or maybe even 3 infringements, ranging from gaining an advantage to not rejoining the track in a safe manner and crowding another car. But there were lots of mitigating circumstances here, which make for some interesting arguments, but I've yet to see one single pundit bother to reference the actual rulebook, which, when you think about it, makes about as much sense as Rich Energy's business plan. I think most of us dislike the outcome of the Vettel penalty, myself included, but the ire is misguided. The stewards acted appropriately and enforced the rules as written, which, despite the absence of flying pigs, seems to be happening more frequently of late. As a final point, let's not waste energy talking about the Vettel penalty in the comments. There are no new arguments to be made, let's all just move on. This rarely works, please can we stop trying it? Ross Brawn commented in his book with Adam Parr that he looked forward to regulatory change when he was at Ferrari and later Mercedes because he felt those teams had the talent and resources to get one over on their rivals. And that's the key point. The best teams have the best people and the sort of spending power that make Bruce Wayne consider a career change. They're going to find the best solutions to any major rule change. The only exception I can really think of was Brawn GP getting the jump in 2009 with the double diffuser loophole. But don't forget that Honda paid for the development of that car, and their budget was reportedly similar to the top teams at the time. Massive regulatory changes rarely do much to shake up the order at the front in any significant or long-term way, and often end up costing smaller teams dearly. Now, having said that, there is some precedent for closing up the regulations to restrict a device that's helping one team in particular. The 1994 regulations were designed to hold back Williams, which worked for about half a season. And recent restrictions on frick suspension and oil burning were supposedly aimed squarely at the silver cars, but we all know how that turned out. I think we can all agree that a lot of modern racing venues are completely lacking in any sort of charm. But looking to the past isn't going to help anything either. The most functional circuits of old are still with us in some form or another, while the ones that weren't suitable were pushed to the side. And with good reason. Look at Brands Hatch. Can you honestly imagine decent racing taking place there in 2019? GT3 cars struggle to get close enough to pass, let alone a 200-mile-an-hour celebration of wind tunnel efficiency. And that's a circuit that's been upgraded over the years to keep in line with modern safety precautions. Nobody in their right mind could argue going back to Rouen, the Nordschleife, or Zandvoort. This is one we hear a lot, and I understand the appeal of the argument. If you make the cars harder to drive, drivers will make more mistakes. But will they? In my 28 years of watching F1, I can surmise that the top drivers rarely make mistakes at all. Just look at Michael Schumacher. Nobody accused those V10 aero rockets of being super easy to drive, but you can count the number of mistakes Schumi made on one hand. So honestly, I can't see it really changing things much at the front. Sure, we all want to see drivers barely able to stand after their Herculean effort like the heroes of the past, but I've always suspected that had as much to do with the drivers as it did with the cars. Again, look at Michael in '92 alongside the likes of Mansell, Senna and Berger on the podium. He looked like he could jump right back in the seat and do another 70 laps, while the other guys needed to get away as quickly as possible for a nice lie down followed by a smoke and a pint. Oh, I love this one, it's a classic. Make the drivers have a higher chance of missing a gear and it'll make the racing more exciting. Now, this is something that used to happen from time to time, but as gearboxes and clutches improved, it became far less common. Honestly, this is like so many of the other things I've addressed in here in that, sure, it might have a small impact for a few races, but everyone will adapt pretty quickly. And it'll only cost a few tens of millions of dollars to achieve. I see this one a lot, but I'm not really sure what it's supposed to improve. Maybe there would be a little less optimization on the cars lap to lap, but it would impact everyone equally, and that usually means that the best teams would adapt the quickest. Stop me if I'm repeating myself. Still, it'll probably save a few quid. And if I don't have to hear Grosjean complaining every time a driver comes within 300 yards of him, maybe that's a plus as well. So Chris, if everyone else's solutions are so stupid, what are you going to bring to the table aside from this smug voiceover? I believe that Formula One is trying to be too many things. It's almost impossible to provide good, close racing while being the pinnacle of engineering and maintaining any sort of economic sustainability. So we need to compromise on what we want from Formula One. Modern cars are too fast, too reliable, they corner too well, brake too efficiently, and they use bugger all fuel in the process. Whether you like them or not, they're pretty efficient at carving their way around a parking lot. But if we look back to what made racing great in the 60s and 70s, it was none of those things. The cars were slow, unreliable, slid round corners, and had braking distances measured in football fields. They were also much, much smaller, which meant that the fledgling circuits and converted road courses of the time actually made for good racing. So my solution to F1 is simple. Make F1 cars crap again. Okay, so maybe that's not totally practical, but reducing the downforce levels, shrinking the cars, and bringing back less grippy tyres would probably do a lot to help. If you need inspiration, look at the current IndyCar, which is a far cry from some of the beastly cars of the past, but it sure is entertaining and, importantly, sustainable. So there you go guys, you can stop asking me about Formula One now. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you can see more content like this, or probably more likely sim racing content in the future. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.